All right. I'm going to wait a couple seconds here for the stream to catch up. And welcome to Artcasters number 305. And today we're going to be talking about composition across different types of media with Christian Mawlam. You put Chris Mawlam, and I've been calling you Christian for like 7 years, so that's going to trip me out.
That's all right. That's all right. You and my mom, Cory. That's okay.
Yeah. Sounds good. So I'm Cory Kerr, Christian's mother, and we've got Joshua Kemble and Scott Serkland here. And anyway, so we'll go around the room real quick, do some plugs, and then we'll kind of jump in. So you're on my channel. If you haven't already, hit the bell, subscribe, and hit the thumbs up to feed the algorithm gods. You can always see my stuff at corykerr.com. Not doing anything new super recently, but if you want to look at some of the kind of stuff I've been playing with, you can go to corykerr.com and follow that to Instagram. And that's kind of where I've been posting stuff. Josh, which one of the 20 books that you've got published right now would you like to talk about?
Okay, so first off, like I have a graphic novel called Two Stories. That's a heartfelt slice of life autobiographical story. Oh my goodness, I might have to plug later. Somebody just got home, so the dogs are gonna freak out.
We'll kick it over to Scott while you figure.
Yeah, I'll trade to Scott and put myself on mute to spare the.
Sure. Scott, where can people find your stuff?
You can find my stuff at circworks.com, where still right now I have all my digital products 50% off. And really, that's only because I was too lazy to change all the prices back, because it's, I don't know, Squarespace doesn't make it too easy for you to do that. At least I don't know how. I think I have to do it one by one. I wish there was just one way to do it in one thing. But anyway, that's to your advantage, because like I said, still all my digital products, tools for making comics, they're all 50% off. And then I've got other stuff up there too, physical products and things like that too. And then you can also find me on my YouTube channel, where I have a series called Making Comics 101. It is a kind of soup to nuts, everything you need to know about making comics course. It's free. It's very comprehensive. I would venture to say it's the most comprehensive course on making comics that you're going to find for free anywhere. And it's on my YouTube channel. So go check out Serkworks Art Labs on YouTube.
Cool. Josh.
All right. Sorry. So apparently I have dogs to promote, but other than that, so yeah, you can check out my autobiographical comic about my journey dealing with depression and caregiving for someone with panic disorder. That sort of alternates between current day in like a very rendered, like realistic style, and past stories from like childhood that talk about things like being obsessed with Indiana Jones to the point where I dressed like him for like a year at school pre-cosplay. So you can get that. That's Two Stories. That's on Amazon. And then also I have a book coming out in May from Graphic Mundi called Jacob's Apartment. That's a love story. And it's kind of coming of age story about two roommates that find commonality through their common love of literature. And yeah, so go pre-order that. And then I have another book thing that I can't talk about, but it's actually happening, so that's kind of cool. But I'm gonna be really busy, so yeah.
That's cool. What's your timeline on when you can publicly talk about that one?
I have no idea. We'll probably talk about those details once everything's all signed and good. So
cool. That's awesome.
Yeah, but
all right. So our guest today is Christian Mawlam. Christian and I teach in the same department. Very, very different things, but have a lot of fascinating conversations because both visual mediums. So Christian, could you give us maybe like a 30 to 60-second rundown of your background, and then we'll kind of jump into the topic?
Yeah, sure. So I come from a commercials background in the UK, shooting stuff for all sorts of clients, and then moved over here in 2014 and teach in the communication department. Video production is the emphasis. So yeah, still visual, still storytelling, but just in the academic sense. Lots of fun.
Yeah. So, okay. So I think I think we could talk about a number of different things, but one of the most interesting things for our audience that I think you've been doing recently is, and I'll bring these up on the screen. You've been sketching out. Let me see. What's the easiest way to do this? I'll share it this way. You've been sketching. Oh, it's doing it weird now. Okay, we'll go like that. You've been sketching out different scenes. Now, are these scenes from actual shows, or are they just like you come up with an idea? And
no, these are from my noggin. So what it was, the genesis of this was, I always used to draw as a kid, and I've drawn throughout my career just to be able to articulate things visually. Sometimes previs a little bit of things for the screen. And so I did a lot more of it when I started to get into motion graphics, because being able to communicate to a person who's shooting for you or the rest of your crew, or what looks like an ugly composition because you've left this giant vacant space that doesn't fit with what's in live action, is, well, that's going to be some text or some logo or some other visual element that needs to be considered. And so I just kind of missed drawing, especially since I've come here, because I'm doing less and less work. I'll do 2 or 3 commercial jobs a year to keep my hand in, but I just don't have the time. But one thing I did miss was the whole kind of previs storyboarding stuff. And so the nice thing about storyboarding stuff is that you can storyboard to your heart's content, because it doesn't cost you anything.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? You can go nuts. And so I just kind of pick a genre, and I'm usually watching movies while I'm doing it, but kind of interestingly enough, I'm not actually drawing stuff from the genre that I'm watching. I might be watching a sci-fi, but I'll end up drawing something from the Second World War, just because it's just kind of imagination food, isn't it? And so I kind of set myself the challenge of working just in black and white, so I could improve my cross-hatching game or what. And so I always thought that was kind of fun. And I mean, and this isn't false modesty, but I mean, I certainly don't consider myself an artist, but I do get a kick out of it, and I do find it kind of relaxing. And with 6 kids and a lot of other things going on in your life, it's always nice to relax, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, and what I liked about this kind of little side project that you're doing is, you're thinking of it, in kind of a film standpoint, but these could easily, be panels from a comic book, or something like that. So
I think the interesting thing for me with compositions, regardless of whether you are a graphic designer, a comic book artist, filmmaker, whatever, essentially you're just arranging elements within a space, aren't you? And so whether it's kind of like a 2D that you try and make look 3D, that kind of thing. I certainly would say that my imagination exceeds my ability to be able to articulate things visually, and I can do a much better job with a camera in my hand. But I think that my kind of drawings are they're probably a little bit flat, really, compared to how I actually shoot things. But for me, it's just trying to get an idea across, something that feels a certain way, just get across a mood, something like that. And that's how I found it was best to communicate. Whenever I was working, and you're always working to a brief in industry, aren't you, for filmmakers in commercials and stuff like that. So I was always really keen on showing visual elements to people, because you can have a style section on a brief, but that just becomes kind of hot air after a while, because my idea of what an aesthetic is, by just me telling you, is still inside my head. And so showing people other kind of reference material, moodboardy kind of stuff, was always very much my bag, compared to, I'm just going to give you some really kind of articulate prose. I'll just go, well, enough of me telling you, let me just show you. And so that's the rationale. Yeah.
So for those watching that don't know some of the terms that you just referenced, a mood board, kind of a professional tool that's used in illustration, it's used in animation, it's used in film, basically anything where people are talking about something that will be seen visually. And I use those all the time with client work as well, because you know, for example, somebody might say, well, I want it to be exciting.
Yeah, which is really, really
does exciting look yellow to you? Does exciting look, you know, like what does that mean? And so I'll go through and I'll say, all right, here's a page full of, you know, this type of exciting image, and then here's a page full of this type of exciting image, and you know, so once you're looking at something, you're able to kind of have a discussion.
Yeah, you can dial it in, can't you?
Say that again.
Sorry for the cross talk. Yeah, you can just dial it in so much quicker. I mean, if someone said, "Oh, I want it to be exciting," well, I'm 43. Cheese and chocolate excites me now. Do you know what I mean? So it's like, oh, is this what you're after?
Yeah,
Stilton and dark chocolate, Stilton and Lindt.
Yeah, it's shocking. Like half of the job, especially as you become more of a veteran in commercial art, it's like half of the skills we acquire as professionals is just simply the ability to bypass a lot of confusion at the beginning by asking the right questions or showing the right things. Like, so in this case, you know, like if somebody's like, hey, give me something cool. It's like, okay, so cool is a million things, right? Like, I think it's pretty cool to do like Mad Men, like mid-century modern stuff. I think it's pretty cool to do like punk rock, like crazy aesthetics from like, you know, the late 70s, or it like cool can be a gamut of like all kinds of different things. So like if somebody doesn't really know how to articulate it like it does help to have something like a mood board where you can show visuals and you can help isolate, you know, those vague questions. And it is so surprised, like, you know, less so now, but it's like, I do remember being really surprised at the amount of people who have a budget, they have money, and they have no idea what they want. and they're asking you to kind of like, you know, and quite often it can be like I'll know it when I see it, which can become really expensive and costly for both you and the client. Like expensive for time for you, and for the client, obviously your time's money, so it's going to cost them. So like doing things like mood boards and stuff like that, it's anyhow. Yeah, that's great.
I was going to add, I think a lot of times a client may think that they're just being, when they say, yeah, just something that looks cool, because they're leaving it up to you, and then to them it's like, no, you get to decide. I mean, pretty much anything you want, as long as it's cool. But it really helps a creative to sort of be dialed in, because, you know, I mean, I think those limitations really, once you have some of those limitations, it actually brings about creativity.
Yeah, it's a distillation, isn't it? It's kind of you've got all this amorphous stuff, and then you kind of distill it down. It's like, oh, we can make some perfume out of that. Absolutely. A few drops of that, instead of just this great big guff cloud of whatever's cool. Yeah, that's always good fun working with clients to help them dial it in.
Yeah, I've been trying to dial somebody in on something. It's just like, oh no, just you know, whatever. It's whatever. And it's like, okay, I could draw a whole bunch but the problem is, once you do whatever, and sometimes when you present that whatever to them, it's like, well, yeah, I don't know if that's quite it. Well,
Scott, they're being clear as day. They're saying to make it pop. You know, like that's what they. I mean, how much clearer can they be? Sorry, but yeah, dude, like things like this is actually why, even if you're working on like a personal project, like a graphic novel, or like a comic, or like storyboarding for a film, doing your thumbnails before you do like a final composition, that's what it's also important for you as a creative, because you can end up having this idea in your head that once you sketch it out, you're like, oh, that doesn't work, you know, like like you know, the client quite often doesn't have that ability to like take the idea and try to see if it'll visually work. And so you know, it's a good way to just cut the time and like work out stuff in a much less costly manner. Cause like you said, Chris, like, you know, if you're boarding something and you need to fix it, that's one thing. If you're like shooting it and that's your raw footage, and then you're having to fix that in like post, like you're talking a really expensive mistake there, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. I mean, filmmaking wise, I mean, there's some huge players just insisting it. I mean, the Cohen Brothers, by all accounts, they're huge storyboarders. They will storyboard, and a lot of people think, oh, the Cohen Brothers, people must be falling over themselves to pay them to make movies. they're not necessarily mainstream filmmakers. I think they're filmmakers for people who like good stories and are a little bit more adult-centric in their themes and that kind of thing. But they ain't making Marvel movies, and so they've said that the kind of the pre-visualization process is one of the things that they use to onboard investors, that they can just demonstrate this is where this is going. We know that we're not going to be scratching our heads on set saying what shot would work best, like student filmmakers or something like that. They've got it down, they've dialed it in, and they know that it's going to work from the outset because it works on paper. That isn't to say that once the rubber meets the road that they're not reflexive to emergent quality. If someone has a brainwave that they can accommodate, of course they would. But yeah, having stuff lined up before you actually start the day is huge.
Yeah. So I thought it might be interesting to talk about how this kind of plays, this kind of thinking, how it can play. Well, I'll tell you a quick story. When I was really young, just graduated from college, got a job in a video shop, and so I was doing kind of B2B video production. Really interesting stuff. Like here's I'm going to shoot a manual on how to defuel an aircraft carrier. Like things like that. So we're like doing all this thing, but one of the things that I noticed is, as a hobby, I decided to take up photography. And when I started to take up photography, I noticed that the films that I was making got better. And then later, when I started teaching myself graphic design, I noticed that my photography and my video got better. And then, much later, as I started to take on illustration, I noticed that everything that I was doing started to get better. And so, like, it's interesting to me that, like, even though I was using different tools and different media and different, all of the things I was doing were different. The idea of composition and the idea of communicating visually, there are huge crossovers that kind of inform each other. And so I know you were kind of an avid comic book reader with 2000 AD and a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, man.
Growing up. How much of that do you think informed what you do today? Do you think you've still got some Judge Dredd running around?
Yeah, I'm not making kind of like post-apocalyptic whatever, but that idea of just being able to again articulate some creative intent with some tangibles, and whether that's me reading Judge Dredd and all that kind of thing. I'm not saying that thematically that stuff makes its way through, but certainly the kind of the raw materials does. Yeah, I mean, it's a close-up, isn't it? It's a wide shot. It's a kind of a mid shot, that kind of thing. How do we get dynamic? If it's, I don't know, like a chase scene or something like that, well, maybe we go low and we go wide with the composition, and maybe with the camera, not just the angle, but the lens choice as well. I mean, and I didn't have a clue about lens choices as a kid when I'm reading comics, but kind of, if you have somebody on a close-up on 100mm lens, that changes the way that somebody's face looks. It compresses it. Whereas if you do that with a 15mm lens, then that's someone looking through the peephole, kind of, it distorts their features and that kind of thing. And both of those things have got different qualities, haven't they? I mean, a telephoto, it could be exactly the same framing, like a medium close-up, but when it's on a longer lens, it feels a lot more observational, a little bit distant. You've thrown the background, whereas if you've got that kind of in-your-face look from a wider lens, the audience can feel a lot more proximate. And so thinking about those kind of things. But back to the original question of how does the comics make its way into what I do now? Again, I just think it's being able to articulate something visually and tell a story. I do think if something works on paper, it will work on film, like genuinely. The narrative needs to be there, the character needs to be there, and the spectacle has to be there. And I think you could say that comics and the other media that we're talking about here need to have narrative, character, and spectacle. And we've all seen movies and even read comics where if one of those things is lacking, we kind of sense it. Maybe when we were younger, we couldn't probably kind of spell that out, but now as kind of grown-ups, it's like, oh, that was all fur coat and no knickers with regards to the just the special effects. Do you know what I mean? And I do love these Marvel movies. I think it's brilliant that they've made these mass market products, but there's an interesting thing being said at the moment. Have any of you guys seen The Last Duel? It's the new one from Ridley Scott. It got like 2 minutes in release at the cinema.
No, but I heard it was really good. It was,
I heard it was really good, and
I wanted to see it, but like you said, it was gone. So
it's $5.99 now on a.
Okay.
It was $19.99 to buy the other day, and it was only available to purchase online. But now it's $5.99. But here's the interesting thing. It was Ben Affleck was stopped on the red carpet. He was promoting some other film, and someone asked him, "What about The Last Duel?" Because he's in it. He's not the lead.
Yeah, didn't him and Matt Damon write it? I think it was the first thing they've written since Good Will Hunting, I think.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, even better. So, I mean, they're great writers. And so, this was interesting because he stopped on the red carpet, and that's a press junket thing. Do you know what I mean? It's like, yeah, smile, cheese. Yeah, hope you enjoy the movie. See you later. Someone asked him about the movie, and he pops his cork for 5 minutes, puts his film studies hat on. Yeah, and they weren't expecting this. But he says to them, they said, "Why do you think Ridley Scott is so frustrated about the reception of this film?" And he started to talk about kind of this mass market product thing. He started to talk about the way that films are kind of accessed by people, no longer in the movies, and that's been exacerbated by COVID and the whole lockdown bit. And because there's been some quite colourful responses from Ridley Scott when he's been interviewed. People have asked him about it, and he's like, "F you," and all that kind of thing. So he's got really explicit about it. But the point that Ben Affleck made, which I think is relevant to this, is he says that the taste and the appetite for more adult themes, and I'm not talking kind of like romper stomper kind of porn and babies getting their heads stoved in. I'm just talking about adult themes that people are able to follow and feel, oh, this kind of represents my life more than A Galaxy Far, Far Away, something like that, something a little bit trite and magical. People sometimes go, I think there's less people go to the movies to be challenged cerebrally, but there are lots of people who enjoy that. And Ridley Scott had said, in fact, he'd called them these effing millennials, he'd said, bemoaning the fact that these kind of more intelligent films, it's still a story about medieval France and people knocking 7 shades of Shabizzle out of each other or whatever. So it's still an action flick to a certain extent. But he was saying that this desire for more long form, more thoughtful stories is kind of waning, and maybe all of these. And again, I keep using Marvel movies as the archetype, but it kind of is, isn't it?
Yeah,
they're very much of a muchness, and I'm not knocking them because they're phenomenally successful, but yeah, pity the filmmaker nowadays who has to. The Cohen Brothers, even. I mean, thank goodness for things like streaming services like Netflix that are able to offer an outlet to people like Martin Scorsese, who it'd be hard for him to pull people into the cinema nowadays because his audience, I think, is dying. Because those millennials, the point that Ridley Scott made, he said, if it's not on their phone, they're not interested. Yeah. And I thought, oh, that's a shame. And so,
sorry.
Sorry,
Chris,
go ahead. Fire
no,
away.
I was just going to say, because I love the Marvel movies, but that's not all I love. And the fact that it's almost like if it's not Marvel, then it's, you may be able to get away with some horror stuff, but really the kind of movies you're talking about, you don't really see them in the theaters anymore.
Yep.
Unfortunately, they're, like you said, the streaming services. I mean, I think a lot of that type of entertainment has shifted over to television, because television is a million times better than it was when I was growing up, as far as the type of, I mean, even, and like you said, like Martin Scorsese, I mean, he's kind of moved over to, whatever, Netflix or whatever. Yeah. And same thing with a lot of these big stars. You didn't see, I mean, you used to have TV stars and movie stars, but now, I mean, if an actor wants to really do something other than a superhero flick or a horror flick or something like that, then they've got to do it on television.
So
Absolutely.
I kind of love this quote, and I've mentioned it a couple times on here because I do like indie comics, and comics are definitely like a superhero dominated genre, right? So when you're doing like slice of life or like autobiographical or like more kind of I don't know, like trying like more literary type comics, it's just a hard fight or struggle. Even doing fantasy or anything like that, like outside of the mainstream like capes and tights stuff, it's been like an uphill struggle for like most cartoonists to get comics to kind of like allow for other things, right? And one of my favorite cartoonists, Daniel Klaus, he's a guy who does a lot of indie stuff, definitely not capes and tights. And he was quoted saying, like, when the Marvel movies started exploding, this was like years ago, but like after they like just became the new thing, he was like, I used to hate superhero comics and think that people who read comics just had like mental problems. Because he was like, because I feel like, hey, there's other stuff to write about, and he was like, it used to really bug me and get under my skin until I saw that it's just everyone, because like now it's films too. And so he was like, I feel less angry about it. And I kind of do too. Like, weirdly enough, I love superhero stuff. I'm a sucker for all of it because I grew up on it. So like inevitably I'm going to give them my cash to watch these movies. But I will say, like, I feel less frustrated about like the kind of myopic view in comics, because it does seem like a general public thing. Like, people want these grand scale myths rather than sort of like I don't know. It's just hard to see like something like The Graduate or something getting like greenlit today, like although it does because of streaming platforms. But I still thought that was funny that Klaus was like, he had just tiraded about capes and tights angrily for years, and then once it became like a film thing, he's like, yeah, I don't know, it's not that big a deal.
Do you know, there's an interesting thing. Cory and I often we've talked about this this website, that Evan E. Richards, Cory, website that's got lots of there's a guy who's captured lots of stills, almost shot for shot. He's broken down kind of scenes into a kind of a summary of the shots within the scene, and it's a super useful site. And it's one that I have my like filmmaking students have a look at. Usually it's it's in that kind of pre-production stage where they're trying to talk about the style of something. Again, because they'll be using all of those dumb woolly terms like, I want it to look moody and gritty and all of that kind of thing. And it's like, all right. And so again, they're able to use that to show. But this is the interesting thing. I've come across another couple of sites as well that are similar. There's another one called Film Grab, which has got, it's less granular than what Evan E. Richards does. But there is a new service, and this is a paid for subscription service, which kind of pained me a little bit when I saw it. What was it called? Let me just have a peek on my phone. It was called, it's called Shot Deck, all one word, Shot Deck. And this Shot Deck is they've done a really good job of curating loads of movie stills to the extent where you are able to dial in, give me a medium close-up of a car at night in the rain with neon lights, and it will go into this big movie archive and pull it from a big film. But part of me was thinking, and maybe this is kind of middle-aged snobbery, do you know what I mean, where you're just thinking, I wish that kids and other people would just like watch films and know references themselves instead of just kind of show me this. Right. And so, because I think there's something that you might not necessarily appreciate it if you haven't kind of watched the film, do you know what I mean, if you're not seeing that shot in context, in the context of actually knowing what the narrative is, knowing what the mood of the protagonists are. They're just fixated on this spectacle aspect. I mean, notwithstanding that, it is a cool site. I just thought, this is pretty smart. But it did make me it gave me pause thinking, there are a lot of really talented young filmmakers nowadays. I mean, filmmaking kit has never been so accessible. I mean, you can have like $5,000. You can have it all. I mean, you could genuinely have like a big fat cinema camera, shoot it all in 6K. You could have $2,000 left over to buy yourself a laptop to cut it on, and the light sensitivity of these cameras is amazing. You could shoot it with available light if you were so inclined, just augment it with a little bit of practical stuff. But it is interesting to see. So yeah, that shot deck site is worth a look. It's interesting, but part of me just thought, I wish younger people maybe would serve the time and get into, instead of just being obsessed with spectacle, that they would start to develop some of the sensibilities of being able to recognize what constitutes a really compelling narrative. And I love what Josh says about it can be a slice of life thing. It can really kind of like downscale, because that's way more relatable anyway. I mean, I've got more in common with a. Sorry, mate.
I was going to say, you look at something like Birdman, right?
Yeah.
And that is about maybe one of the most mundane and boring things you could imagine, is just this guy getting older and being frustrated that he's older and not cool anymore, you know? But the way that they shot it, and it is, I mean, you go to the Ebony Richards site. I'll probably get demonetized for this, but I'm gonna bring this up.
Right. Is that how this works?
Well, I mean, I'll lose the
internet giveth and it taketh away.
Yeah, I'll lose the 37 cents I would have made on this film or this video here. But if you look at this, let's go. Let's see, I'm gonna do this. I should have done this before. And go here. There we go. Okay. So if you look at this, like the shots that they're choosing, like if you do something like this, this is three people sitting at a table having a conversation. But it is shot in such a way, the composition of it is, you can see what's going on. And most people, as I break these down in class, like I do one where I break down kind of the opening scene of 300 in class, and we spend about an hour just talking about 4 frames of this movie. Most people initially, if you only give them like 3 minutes to talk about something, they'll talk about the actor's facial expressions. But then if you're like, no, let's talk color, composition, like shot choice, blocking, let's talk framing, let's talk symbolism of those things and all that. Like you get like who is bigger, who is smaller, who's higher in the frame, who's lower in the frame, who's further from the camera.
Yeah, and then if you're thinking about shooting that, you're like, okay, I got to be aware of the line of action here because that's a little more complicated. Actually, that's so brilliant. They still kept him on the left, but it's anyhow.
Well, I mean, the trick is with that film as well. I mean, for all intents and purposes, it's a one-er, isn't it? So it isn't like there's cuts in this film. What you don't see in this is the kind of the camera movement. But yeah, that shot there. So much of this is shot on a pretty wide angle lens. Yeah, almost like a 14 to an 18, something like that. And when you get close to someone on a wide angle lens, you feel really close to them. Like genuinely, they are in your face and they're proximate. And so, proximity to a character, just close up, doesn't necessarily make it so that you feel proximate. Yeah, and could be you've zoomed in.
Yeah, and speaking of proximity, another thing that I point out, and this is where I talk about proximity, is if you look at these 3 people and these 3 people, they are doing the same thing. You have 2 people holding a person in the middle and 2 people holding a person in the middle.
But it's almost a match shot, just different framing.
And I think that's intentional. And this works in comics and film. It doesn't work if you only have a single image. It only is only going to work in sequential. Is you see this going on, and you have diagonal lines. You have extremely high contrast. You almost remove the humanity from anything because they're silhouetted against this stormy sky.
Yeah, they're objects. Yeah.
And then you see We still have some very high contrast, but we see a lot of the facial expression, and there's overlap. The relationship, because of the proximity of the two on the outside to the character on the inside, feels very close, and it feels very familial, and it feels very caring. Whereas the distance between these characters and the angular negative space that's caused with like these sharp angles and shapes that are created with these kind of contorted body shapes, and the distance is greater, and that makes it feel aggressive, and it makes it feel like they are not as related. They're more distant to each other, both metaphorically and actually literally on the screen. And so as you compare these two shots, they're basically the same shot until you get into like, well, how are we actually going to compose this? And that's where I think like true mastery of visual communication, whether it's film, whether it's illustration, whether it's comics, whether it's whatever, that's where you get that is in those tiny little details where you say, well, let's pull back a little bit on this one so that we're less intimate and they're more objectified. Let's push in on this one a little bit so that we feel more intimate and we connect with them more, and everything, the way that they light it and everything. Anyway, just a fascinating kind of, this is one of those two frames. The other ones are where I go through this scene and we talk about like, you know, what do these pillars represent? You know, who is like the pillars? Well, the woman in the back is like the pillars. We talk about angular and vertical and diagonal lines and horizontal lines, and how you can tell, like you can see the boy go from a very horizontal position to a very vertical position to a very diagonal position. And you see a small character arc from, you know, submissive and scared, you know, downtrodden to defiant to taking action from that defiance. And all of that is done without anybody saying anything. You don't have the narrator coming over the top saying, and the boy got courage, you know, or anything like that. You see it.
The boy was isolated.
Say that again.
I said the boy was isolated.
Yeah.
The social mores of the Spartans was very harsh.
Yeah.
No need. Yeah, it's all there, isn't it? Yeah. No escape. I mean, it's almost like this. It's a rock and a hard place, isn't it? That's the arena that he's got to kind of develop himself in. And it's not like he's got anywhere to run because it's just pitch black. That is nothingness. It is nowhere, isn't it?
And you have all of these vertical pillars in the background, you know, that are very much like jail cell.
Oh, it's a prison,
bars, and they're pushing down on him. They're very oppressive, surrounding him, and yet the same characters in the same scene. And you go here, the camera moves, the lighting warms up. We see a plant growing in the background towards the sunlight that's now exposed. He's no longer trapped. And that proximity again, where the characters are sharing that space. And everything about what we understand about who these people are changes. And you start to get, instead of the pillars being like prison, you start to get the pillars diminishing off into the background towards this vine. And you might get the impression that maybe those pillars are the stability of this happening over generations past, you know? So this is, I mean, I don't want to spend like, you know, 90 minutes going over this like I do in class, but I guess what I want to ask you, Christian, is when you are teaching stuff like this to film students, how do you approach, I mean, other than just like case by case, you know, they're doing a project and you talk to them case by case, generally, how do you approach like trying to get them to think about what compositional choices to make? Are there some like general foundational rules, you know, or what are the types of things that you talk about? Because I'm coming from the design perspective, so I go, you know, proximity, repetition, contrast, you know, those type of design principles. But where do you come at it from film?
Yeah, well, I mean, it depends what you're working on. I mean, if it's a narrative film, like a short or something like that, then really we ought to be thinking about how do we want the audience to feel? How's the audience going to be able to relate to the character within this scene? Asking yourself a fundamental question: which character owns this scene? I mean, that's a big deal. And so that will inform things like perspective, like where you're going to put the camera. If someone, I mean, you could have a conversation between two people, and Tarantino does this, doesn't he? He gets a bit cheeky with this in like Pulp Fiction. You've got a two-way conversation, or rather it's a talking to, but you hear the person who's giving this person a lecture, essentially, and you just see the other person. It never does the old shot reverse shot, which is subverting the kind of the expectation to a certain extent. That convention of, well, go on then, it's a game of tennis, the ball's in their court now, let's see who that is. But sometimes there's no need for that.
Yeah.
So I would always be thinking about kind of who owns the scene. If it's not a narrative thing, but notwithstanding that, I do think that even like commercials are the best commercials are narratives anyway. They get us to think and feel something. It's very rare that you'd be able to, in a 30-second commercial, offload some information to somebody, because our brains just don't work that way. You're better off just making people feel something, and then just that little memory hook gets embedded a little bit deeper because they've had the feelies associated with it. So yeah, having them ask that question, what would you like your audience to feel as a result of seeing this? Think about the emotional responses, and even when they're coming up with copy, with script for what characters ought to be saying and that kind of thing, keeping it conversational. And so the interesting thing is, even with a camera, do you know that, just harking back to that shot that you showed from Birdman, where there was the three round the table, it looked like a point of view. The camera almost occupied the position of a point of view shot of a fourth character. It was the camera's character. And so you can do that with the right lens choice and the right proximity to the talent or to the subjects. Or you can go kind of further back. You could be a little bit more like Michael Mann, like in Heat or something like that, who likes to do things a lot more kind of telephoto. It's distant, it's observational. And so those are my go-tos to start off with, but again, sometimes, so narrative and character should inform spectacle, never the other way around.
Yeah.
We saw over the past, talking about filmmaking kit being cheaper and more accessible than ever, we have seen drones just kind of taking over the world. Do you know what I mean? This disembodied spirit shot hovering over something, and it's like, that means something. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love a helicopter shot, and that's how I think of them from when I was a kid, the opening shots of The Shining or something like that. But that cost a lot of money to do. You had to kind of schedule a flight and get a pilot and get an operator. But now any Tom, Dick, or Harry can kind of fly a drone, and often young people will get a drone, and guess what their films are full of? Drone shots. And it's the kind of the tail wagging the dog, the spectacle aspect. And it should always be in service of the narrative. It should always be in service of the character. And so that would be my my 2 penneth on that.
You know, that's brilliant advice too, because I find that in comics too. Like people, I think when you're storytelling in general, like you really do need to be constantly questioning, what am I trying to say here? And what am I trying to make people feel? Like, because quite often that's going to inform a lot of what you're talking about. And I don't even, I'm forgetting the movie. It was like a horror movie or something. But I remember there was a scene where somebody's having a really uncomfortable phone conversation, and there's a kid listening in and kind of hearing the conversation. And the director chose to actually keep the parent in the situation that the kid's overhearing somewhat off screen. So like you just see almost like you're blocked from even, and also decided to like mute a lot of the conversation. So you're not even hearing the conversation. So not only did they want you to like know that the kid's peeking into this, but they wanted you to feel like a kid peeking in through a crack in a door to a conversation, obscuring the audio so that it's like you're just getting hints of stuff. It keeps the mystery there. And so the whole point, and what's interesting is like, with scenes like that, you'll often like notice in a theater or something, like people will actually like turn to look around. Like they'll like, like when you're doing comics, when you're doing anything like that, like I feel like even the best like superhero comics shouldn't just be like endless fights for no reason, unless it's a kung fu flick and then all rules are out the window.
Yeah,
but because a kung fu flick should just be really stupid premise, awesome fights.
Yeah.
But you know, like if you build up and like create really good narrative and create some weight and reason between a big action sequence, then the action sequence feels like something, you know. It's kind of like the guy who never says a bad word and then suddenly they say it and everyone in the room goes, oh, even people who cuss all the time, right? Because there's power to that word when you don't use it a lot. It's like that with action, with drone shots, with splash pages, like in comics, you know, people tend to like overdo it. And sometimes like it's good to give like, you know, those little ancillary details during a conversation. Maybe you're not even showing the people talking. Maybe you're showing like the corner of a coffee maker dripping or something, you know, like whatever it is. It's like going with the literal doesn't always, or just the spectacle doesn't always give the best emotional response. And so like, yeah, that's great advice. Cause like, I think quite often, I think even at graphic designers too, the best graphic design is usually pared down and simple and is doing something so obvious that everyone else should have done it, but they couldn't. And a lot of that is like thinky graphic design. It's not the execution that's incredible. It's just the thought behind it, the concept, the feeling that it generates, you know? So yeah, anyhow, sorry. Great advice.
I think across the board, I've got mates of mine who are architects as well and graphic designers. And they talk about like, it's all about the end user. It's not about the kind of the artist. Even like your Frank Gehry's of the world, like your kind of your big time kind of lords of the architecture space. They're all about if this concert space isn't functional and it's just beautiful, we've got a real problem here.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And so just having things that are just cool. But I think that's the trouble. And again, here's me bemoaning the kind of the next generation. It's because that's my job. We're on the front line of seeing like kind of young creatives like cutting their teeth, and I think there is a lot with the internet and Pinterest and all of this and this new shop deck thing that can just kind of give them all sorts of shortcuts to creativity. But I don't necessarily think it's creativity. I think it's almost just an act of curation and imitation rather than something kind of fresh and special. I mean, everything's an iteration. Do you know what I mean? I'm cool with that. But yeah, sometimes I think that people are missing out and we're selling our audiences short if we don't take the time to think about what is it that I'm really trying to say.
Yeah.
Yeah, I find that quite a bit. I teach one class that is kind of a survey of different things that you can do with vector graphics. And I get so bored about every 6 to 8 months. Everybody just does the same thing and you see it shift. And it's just like, oh, the algorithm must have started choosing something else now because this is what everybody is seeing. And is
it the Icon project, Cory?
Oh, the Icon project, the gig poster project, like all of that stuff. Even in the gig poster project where I push them for this generation, I push them into some very uncomfortable places. Like don't touch a screen, don't touch anything with a screen for several days and just, see what happens to your brain. And they do go into some very creative spaces, but in their execution, so many of them, it just looks like whatever the visual trend is at the time. And I'm trying to get them to understand. And one, I understand like, all creation starts with imitation. Yet you have to, as you're learning, as you're sharpening your chops and figuring stuff out, imitating other people is fine. But at some point in time, you've got to like look at many different sources. One of the best things that I've seen is like you were saying, as we were talking about the stuff that you're drawing originally, you're not drawing a Western scene when you're watching a Western, and I think that's really important. Like if you are making a horror comic, go see what they're doing in comedy. Go see what they're doing in a rom-com. Go see what they're doing, in something that's completely unrelated to that genre. If you're doing a cutesy animation, go watch a kung fu flick, and what can you take and adapt from that. And I think that's a missing thing. One of the things that I think I am most frustrated with the current generation of college students, and I don't know how much of this is COVID or how much of this is generational, but there is a dearth, a total lack of curiosity, and everything has been filtered so much down to like, well, this is what you like, I'm just going to give you more of it and more of it and more of it and more of it. You're never challenged to be like, well, would you like this, or would you like this, or how do you feel about this? There's very rarely anything outside of what you've already consumed. You just get more of the same. If you like this, then you like this. And it's like, well, what about watching and listening to things that you don't do? I do an activity that really throws people. I haven't done it recently. I should do this again though. But I have them come up with a character, a person, right? Give me a psychographic profile of somebody who is completely different than you, politically, religiously, philosophically. And what I find very interesting is I put them in little groups of three or four students doing this. They immediately begin mocking the person that they're creating, right?
Oh.
And it's like, well, this person, I'm a Democrat, so this person loves Trump, and I do this, so this person does this other thing. And then eventually after only a couple of minutes, they begin mocking this person. And then I say, okay, now I want to know with all seriousness, why does this person believe those things? Why does this person go in and, and make those choices? And I want you to be genuine and not insulting. And then I have them create something as that person rather than as themselves. And what's really fascinating about this experience is they start to experience something outside of what's been curated for them specifically. And it's, you can't change the world in an hour, but they do get to the point where they start making comments. Oh, it's kind of interesting that you pointed out that we were mocking this person, but they are a real person. I could see how, maybe being raised this way or thinking these things or having these experiences could cause you to, be different or whatever. But my concern with the current generation is they don't go out of their way to read stuff that they might not like, or watch things that they might not like, or just experience something that they haven't already experienced. It's such a safe, repetitive consumption that I don't know that they really even know how to go out and experience a variety of different types of media or different types of art or different types of anything.
Which is really a shame in like college, because and I think some of this can be blamed a little bit on some of the colleges themselves and the more vocation-oriented teaching, where it is important to like give people skill sets that they can get a job with, right? But like one of the primary functions of college is like enriching a human being, like giving them a wealth of knowledge that goes beyond just application in their own field. And like that actually enriches their field. Like, so one of the things I love about having gone to like a state school that I'm actually really proud of was like, first off, like as an art director now, I review portfolios from like Art Center and from these giant, art colleges all the time. And I can almost like pinpoint like, oh, this person graduated 2007, like fall, because it's all the same style, right?
Yeah.
Whereas I get the Cal State kids and like at least from my alma mater, like the style is like all over the place and it's awesome. It's like there's different unique voices. And I think that had to do with the way they structured the art department where I went. But I think also having a broader education, having to take like philosophy classes, having to take like courses in logic and like just getting outside of your comfort zone and building up a base of knowledge and reference like that you can pull out and reference, like it does enrich your art. It enriches your thinking skills and your problem solving abilities. And also like it's hard to take like upper level like humanities courses without like occasionally having to cross paths with the idea of having to steel man an opposing argument. Like, it's like the best way to figure out what you believe is like steel man the belief you completely disagree with. Like find the best argument possible to defend what you hate. and then it starts to expand your mind and your thoughts. And I think it actually works even for art. Like, to pick an art style you absolutely can't stand and like watch like 10 cartoons in that style or read 10 books done in that style. But yeah, I think like being pushed into uncomfortable situations is part of college. Like, at least I think it should be, at least in the sense of like uncomfortable thoughts that don't come easy, like, challenging questions, those are really fundamental for like growing, I don't know.
And every time you do that, you get torn apart in the evaluations.
Yes. Yeah. And it's tough because a lot of those people, if they could evaluate you like 5 years later, would be like, praising what you did.
Right.
But yeah, that is one of the hard parts about the structure too. Yeah.
So I'm curious, Josh and Scott, what, as you guys are composing things, we heard what Christian thinks about first as he's doing that. How do you guys choose composition in a shot? How do you decide whether you want to be, close, up, down, far away? What's going through your mind as you're making those compositional choices?
For me, the first thing I think about is variety and what I've already done and what I have yet to do. Because I definitely don't want to have the same type of shots repeated over and over again. Certain things I have with the book I'm working on now, I have certain things that I've just developed as part of the storytelling. For instance, in my book, which is a kids versus zombies story, whenever the zombies show up, the panels, they start to get a little askewed and out of whack, and it's just kind of something. And I don't know how many people notice that. I do point it out quite a bit just when I'm talking about composition, but it's just one of the things that I do in this particular story. But that's for that story. So in another story, it might be something totally different. Usually each story I approach, I'd like to do something a little different as far as composition, but always thinking about foreground, middle ground, background, creating some depth within those panels. So I don't know, those are some of the things I think of. Obviously, any, the basic stuff, like, always have your establishing shots so you know where you are in the story. And then, I try to just work in a variety of different shots and play around with things, see what works. Paneling's a big thing, is this, going from some, I've done pages with like 9 panel grids. I've done pages with single panels. I've done pages with just really odd panels, and then sometimes just the absence of any kind of panels at all. Just depends. So I don't know. What about you, Josh?
Yeah, I like what you were saying about the zombie thing, because I don't know that all viewers or readers of something are like consciously aware of the decisions that we make.
Right.
But I do think that they all feel it.
Yeah.
It's not like the average person is going to sit there and watch that and go, "Oh, I feel very close to this person because this is an intimate close-up," but they're not going to articulate that in their mind. But when the panels start getting wonky, they're going to start feeling a little bit disturbed, or a little bit of that kind of like, oh, there's some discomfort going on because of that. Yeah. So I love that. Josh, how about you?
So I really spend a long time thinking about the best way to convey. Like, at first it's just, how do I convey, like, there's a base level that I need to cover as a storyteller from my own script or whatever. And it's like, I have action that I have to depict. So yeah, I'm always thinking about the action initially. Like, even if the action's like somebody rubs their nose, whatever, it's like, just figuring out, like, initially it's just like trying to figure out how can I stage that in a way that doesn't like seem weird, like where I could put, like, it's almost like if it were a film, if I could put it on mute and I could understand what's happening. Like that's one of my key things is like, am I clearly telling a story? So clarity is number one, clarity of action, right? Then I get into like my second level thought is like the emotion. And even when I'm writing, I'm considering that, right? Like like with the actions, like the actions are all underlining emotion, right? But it's like, I'm trying to think what emotion am I trying to convey? If it's like a sequence where, like right now I'm actually working on in 2 stories. It's like a really uncomfortable sequence. And so I'm doing these really uncomfortably close-ups quite often in it, just to kind of make it super intimate and uncomfortable. But I also like, I think this is one of the things I love in comics that might make me a little weird. I actually don't mind repeating a panel multiple times. Because again, it's like, it's about kind of conveying emotion. And weirdly enough, I like brought it up at the beginning, but like one of my favorite movies that kind of changed my mind about a lot of pacing was The Graduate. There's like a sequence in The Graduate where the character's like got a cigarette and he's like laying down, and it's just like a 5 or 10 minute shot where he's scooting the cigarette butt on a windowsill full of cigarette butts, and he's like pushing the butts with the butt of the cigarette, like, and it just conveyed a lot about the character and in this like very boring sequence, but it's beautifully shot, right? It's just like, or like at the end, there's an uncomfortably long drive that's a famous ending scene, where he holds it probably like a minute longer than the shot would be comfortable for the audience intentionally. So you have this moment of like, oh wait, is this a happy ending? Like, and then it's so things like that. Like I don't, that makes me think about patience and where do I need to spend time? Where do I need to rest? Because I do find that a lot of comics just slam through subjects, and that makes for interesting reads. But I love like, I love a cartoonist who will stop to like show a character like who's flustered or something, like maybe, do something with their face or like pick at their eyebrow or something, like just a little quiet moment, and maybe even repeat that same frame like multiple times just to give it some pacing. So I definitely think about like pacing, tempo, emotion, and then of course like lighting comes in and all that fun stuff. But the key things I'm usually thinking about. Oh, and then the last thing I'll usually do is say like, am I just going with the obvious? Is the obvious furthering the story, or I'm just doing the obvious because it was the first thing that came to my mind? And if it's just because it's the first thing that came to my mind, I'll try to look outside of it and see if there's like a different way I can do it. Kind of like Scott was talking about, like where, like if you're doing an action sequence and everybody just naturally usually makes a horizon line, like a 90-degree angle, right? But if you're doing like an action sequence or you're trying to make people feel a little off kilter, like why not shift the horizon, like get a tilt there, get some nice, lines like of action moving in that, that aren't necessarily just like sitting at a like T, which is a pretty stable feeling, right? So
I'm watching Hawkeye right now on Disney Plus. I don't know if you guys have seen that.
I haven't seen the latest, but I've seen the other.
It's based on I forget the guy's first name. I think it's David Aja, and it is the illustrator who does that series, My Life is a Weapon. And
who, by the way, Disney should kick some cash to. There's a bit of a controversy about that, but they need to pay that guy.
Now they hired the writer as a consultant on that series, but I don't think that they've talked to the artist, which is interesting because anyway, he did a lot, and it's like the title sequence alone is just animating his covers.
Yeah. So he did the cover artwork too, because that stuff, it was brilliant design work on that.
Yeah. But one thing that he did in that comic book series that they're not doing in the TV show, and I think to the detriment of the TV show, is because it is about, you know, what is Hawkeye like when he's an Avenger? What's his life like when he's not an Avenger? You know, when he's not doing that thing. And so they have these sequences where they're fighting, you know, AIM or the Hand or whatever else. And every time they do that, it goes into a total flat side scroller video game shot. And so like everything else, there's these really dynamic shots. And then whenever he's, you know, an Avenger, they pull the camera back and they do that 90-degree angle, kind of like a third of the way up horizon. And it looks like it's not pixelated, but it is composed like a Double Dragon or you know, like a Street Fighter kind of video game style. And it is really an interesting choice in composition, because emotionally it feels like, oh, this is very methodical and thought out, and it has nothing to do with his personality or his personal life. This is just work. And then you go back into you know, the rest of the story, and the camera pulls in and it gets very close, and we start getting more interesting compositions and things. But it's fascinating the way they do that, and they're missing that. I don't know if they're missing it because like those shots have Captain America and Wolverine and, you know, all that stuff in there, you know, and that would be expensive to do on TV. But it is interesting the way that they do that. I think you mentioned fight sequences, and it just triggered that for me. But but yeah.
No, and I think that's a good example of what we were talking about, because the second you described that it's like this side shot, just kind of a stale, like flat, long, you know, view.
Yeah.
I instantly thought, yeah, so that would give me the feeling like, oh, another day at work, you know, like
right.
a boring day job. So like it instantly that conveys itself just in describing that. And that's gotta be, I would think, either a really happy accident.
Oh no.
Or most likely.
Yeah, it's so obvious that it's a very deliberate choice, and really effective one too.
Yeah. I think that's, I don't know. So yeah. Cory, what about you?
I think you guys kind of hit it. But yeah, the first thing is very utilitarian. You know, what am I trying to say here? Like, what is the clear thing I'm trying to get across? And the next thing I try to do is, you know, is there anything that I can do to this situation that will punch up the emotion that will carry that? And I think those two things, just clarity and then emotion, that kind of that's driving, you know, whatever. I don't know. As much as I wish there were a formula for it, for me, it's very kind of instinctual. And so I try to consume and analyze as much as I possibly can. And then as I'm doing it, I don't think about it that much. You know, I just want to make sure, like, did you get this point across in this? And how did it feel? And as long as I hit those two things, those are driving kind of every decision that I make on that.
I think there's an interesting idea, kind of composition wise, when you're trying to be, as a storyteller, a little bit more kind of obtuse, where you're not necessarily hitting it on the head. Like, yeah. I was thinking about when Josh was saying about having like the coffee maker in the foreground, and what Scott was saying about your establishing shot, how a lot of the time for young people, when I say, well, what's going to be your establishing shot for this scene, they'll say, well, exterior wide. And it's like, meanwhile, back at Snake Mountain, do you know what I mean? Or something like that. And it's like, I mean, that works, but are there more interesting? Well, I always think of, for establishing shots, what is it, the Brian De Palma film, Carlito's Way? Do you remember that from the 90s? Yeah. And it opens up, and it's a point of view shot. The camera is like, let's say this bottle's the camera. I'm lying on a gurney, yeah, because I've been shot central protagonist, yeah, and I'm looking at strip lights on a corridor, and it's just brilliant. And I'm like, what? It's super subjective, and then you get this exposition from Carlito talking about, oh, my life's fallen to bits, and it's kind of the end of the beginning and all that kind of thing. But I just thought, oh, what a smart way to start telling a story, where you're actually withholding information as the storyteller visually from the audience, instead of just going, here, this is what you need next. Now think this. Now think this, because it's more breadcrumbs, isn't it, than kind of Vegas signs as to what the audience should be thinking. The moment that you do kind of signpost everything, I think the more adult audience members will just check out and go, oh, this isn't for me. this is for little people.
Yeah, Cory, that shot, that establishing shot that you had. I mean, I know it's been done before, but you pulled it off really well. And was it from Hell's Heart, or?
Yeah, from Hell's Heart.
Yeah, where you wasn't it? You start in the eye of the fly, and it kind of wasn't the eye, or?
I started. I wanted to start really abstract.
Yeah.
Because the reason, so I started with this macro shot it makes no sense. You don't even know what it is. Of a fly's eye, and then I slowly pull out over the course of, I think, 6 panels to just a guy's drink, and it's just the fly sitting on the edge of his drink. And I started it that way because I almost wanted you to be disoriented and to feel like, we're very close to the narrator, and so we're inside of his head, first person narration, and so as he's kind of telling his story, I want you to kind of feel like, and that was, when I say utilitarian, I don't mean, establishing shot, because I actually reversed it, because I end with that wide exterior shot, that they're on that it's on a pub on a giant turtle floating in the ocean. But I want you to be disoriented and be questioning what's going on, because that whole short comic is about, what is actually happening. It's almost all exposition that doesn't explain anything. And so I kind of wanted to start really abstract visually as well, and pull that out. And so the utility of that isn't to like spoon feed the user, but the point that I was trying to get across was, what can I do to, one, make them feel very close, and 2, make them feel kind of disoriented.
Yeah, I did something similar, because there's sometimes with your first shot where you don't really want the reader to know where they are. Like I did a scene where it was a flashback, but I didn't want people to know it was a flashback. So it started off pretty big, just basically the main character's face, but in the background you can see a little bit of this treehouse. And as you go back, you'll notice that some of the decorations in the treehouse are different, because it was a few years previous, and a previous owner of that house. So I didn't want to give too many of those clues right away, and then gradually you realize that this is a flashback. So just things to keep in mind. There's so many cool tricks and things you can do. Is once you know what you're trying to convey, or what you're trying to hide, or whatever, there's interesting ways to do it. And it's especially in a comic book or a written medium, you could say things where, if it was a movie, like, for instance, if you have a narration but you don't want to let on who's giving that narration, you can't really pull that off in a film so much, because you can tell by the voice. But in prose or in comics, I mean, you could have that narration start, and then there's a reveal of, oh no, I thought this was this person talking, but it's somebody else. So yeah, it's also, I think a lot of it has to do with the kind of medium that you're working in, and what are some of the things that you can only do in that medium. That's some of the things that I really like to do. And for comics, a lot of it is paneling, because panels are, specific to just comics. Yeah.
Well, we're over an hour. I promised Christian it would be about an hour. So here's your hour and 15 minutes.
so we could get the old man to bed.
Yeah.
Go on, have a bit more cheese.
But yeah, so
it's Christmas.
But yeah, I think Christian, I'd love to have you on several more times over the course of the next few years, and talk more about this type of stuff. But Christian and I are actually collaborating on a project. So when I'm going on sabbatical next semester, Christian's going to shoot the live action portion of what we're doing, and then my team will kind of animate over the top of some of those things. So it'll be fun to put all this into practice.
Cool. It's going to be an amazing project. I didn't know Chris was on that. That's cool.
Yeah. So anyway, Frank is mentioning that we should remind the viewers about the super chat, and I should have done that before I. But
thanks for reminding us, Frank. I knew we'd forget about that.
I forget all the time.
Well, I was the secret. You were talking about the super chat, but he also reminded us we were supposed to do a secret word.
Oh yeah. Dang. I forgot about the secret. All right, we got to take some notes.
What will we do without Frank?
The secret word is any of the words that you didn't understand that Christian said. That was the secret word. One of my favorite things. So I lived in Scotland for 2 years, and so it's very rare that I don't understand what Christian is saying, because I'm just used to those accents over the UK. But we'll be in a meeting, and Christian will say something that sometimes is very blunt and biting. And I look at everybody and I'm like, I am the only person in the room who understood what just came out of his mouth, because everybody's just like, yeah. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, oh, this is great.
That's a superpower.
Yeah. It's one of the most entertaining things I get to do at work is just watch Christian insult people and have them not realize that that's what's happening.
I'm not insulting him, Cory. You're painting me out to be something I'm not. But usually I'm a bit more blunt than the average Idahoan. To be fair, the cowboy types are plenty blunt and they're great.
Right.
I can relate to them. It's just the ones that have got this kind of confected savoir-faire that they like to kind of, they got this barrier of manners, and it's like, come on, we're on the clock here, people. Let's just say what we think.
That's great. Yeah. Anyway, so thanks for coming out. Anywhere would you like people to go to your Instagram or check out anything that you're working on?
Who, me?
Yeah.
Yeah, like those storyboards. Do you have those storyboards posted anywhere?
No. Do you want to know what my outlet is for my storyboards? I take a picture of them and I send them to Cory. I say, "Oh, check this out." I've got an audience of one, and he's really appreciative. So I genuinely should just set up something on Instagram, and then you can push it, Cory.
You've got a 100% engagement rate in your audience of one right now. It works really well. Josh, where can we find your stuff?
joshwithkemble.com. That'll take you to links to my current graphic novel, 2 stories, which you can get for a really reduced rate on Amazon. Although if you don't want to support the megalith, you can also request your local indie bookshop, order it. And then you can also just click Jacob's Apartment on there as well, and that'll take you to where you can pre-order my graphic novel coming out in May of 2022.
That's awesome. And you can find my stuff at corykerr.com. If you go to corykerr.com/online, you'll see some of the more recent projects I'm working on. I am going to be doing a Q&A at a film festival tomorrow night, another Hole in the Head film festival. So if anybody wants to check that out, I think it's streaming. So I'm not driving to Portland, so I will be streaming at least. But yeah, you can check out some of the stuff I've done at corykerr.com. And if you want to check out some of the stuff I'm drawing recently, including the thing I've been drawing today, you can go to Instagram. And Scott, how about you? Where can we find your stuff?
Yeah, I forgot to mention this at the top of the show, although it only really applies to people who are local to Arizona and more or less the West Valley, but or if you make the trip, whatever. But I'm going to be doing a signing at Surprise Comics on Wednesday, the 22nd, I believe, next Wednesday. And so I'll just be doing sketches, and sketches make a great gift. So if you're looking for a last minute Christmas present, come on down, and I'll be taking commissions and usually, I don't really open myself up for commissions. I usually only do them when I'm doing store signings and stuff. So it's kind of a rare thing. So if you aren't in Arizona and you know somebody is, throw them a few bucks and say, "Hey, go get me a commission." So I'll be doing that again. That's at Surprise Comics. And other than that, I've got my sales still 50% off my digital products.
Wait, what? That's insane. That's a good sale. You guys
I know.
go take advantage of that. He still hasn't taken it down.
Yeah. Hopefully I'll remember. But that's my, me forgetting about that's to your benefit, because the sale is still on. And let's see, yeah, and again, my YouTube channel, you can find Making Comics 101. And yeah, that's all I have to promote. But I also want to talk about this show we do, the Artcasters. We do this show every single week. It bounces back and forth from Cory's channel. Next week it'll be back on my channel and then Josh's channel, and then we'll do that again. And we always usually have a different guest on. It's typically on Thursday nights, but especially with the holidays, who knows? We might have to do a different day or whatever. So it gets a little confusing, but if you want to know exactly when we're going to go live with the guests is, whose channel it's on, just join our mailing list. We don't spam you or anything like that. There's a link in the description of this video. Click on that, join the mailing list, and we will send out a newsletter just letting you know when we're going live about 30 minutes before we go live.
Great. All right, Christian, stick around for a minute. And the rest of you, thanks for being in the chats and for watching, and we'll catch you guys next week.
Cheers, guys.